Guys, now that we are almost to the middle point of the NFL season, I wanted to go through 4 different teams that I think would be best suited losing as many games as possible, possibly, trying to secure a number 1 and number 2 overall pick. Their future is more important than finishing with 7 wins instead of 3 wins. That's kind of the strategy behind tanking. Of course, the overall tanking culture and things like that. There could be locker room issues if your, front office tries to force your team to lose and stuff like that. But in general, guys, the idea of tanking does make sense, especially for these 4 teams to position themselves better for the future. All 4 of these teams, in my opinion, have 0 chance at the playoffs, and the idea of winning 8 games versus winning 4 games, to get a worse pick, it's not good enough. I'd rather finish with 4 wins and get the number 3 pick than finish with 7 wins and get the number 12 pick. Starting the first team, guys, it is the Pittsburgh Steelers. A lot of Steelers fans out there not used to this. They're 1-4. They just got annihilated by Buffalo, but I think this is best case scenario for Pittsburgh, and I think the real thing that we'll be watching, what do they do with TJ Watt and his injury? If I am the general manager of the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm telling TJ Watt, listen, take a seat for the rest of the year. You're not coming back out here. We have a chance to potentially create the best pass rushing duo in the NFL if we get a top 2 or 3 pick and get Will Anderson. If Pittsburgh keeps losing, you take a look at their schedule. Very tough next 3 matchups with a rookie quarterback, Kenny Pickett, Tampa Bay, Miami, Philadelphia, probably all losses. We'll see if Tua is back for that Miami game. New Orleans is going to be tough. Versus Cincinnati's tough. At Indianapolis isn't easy. If you are Pittsburgh, you would love to land a top 2 or a top 3 pick. Right now, when it comes to the NFL draft, I think there's a clear top 3 with CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, and Will Anderson. If you could get a top 3 pick, tell TJ Watt, rest up, stay home. I know it's tough. He's a competitor, things like that. But if we can, if you're the Steelers, you've already hopefully got your franchise quarterback in Kenny Pickett. He's going to have his growing pains. He's going to struggle. You're going to lose a lot of games. But you've got a nice infrastructure around him with Najee Harris, with Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, George Pickens. Your offense is pretty much set. You just need to invest into the offensive line, and then possibly if you get a top 2 or 3 pick, you've got 2 phenomenal options of either trading down and getting a Queen's Gambit of 3 or 4 first-round picks because a team's going to trade everything to try and get a franchise quarterback, or you just stay at pick 2 or 3 and draft Will Anderson, and now you've got the best pass rushing duo in the NFL, and Will Anderson is coming in, and you've got him for 4 years, 5 years actually, before you've got to pay him a ton of money to extend him. So you're going to have that pass rushing duo of TJ Watt and Will Anderson throughout all of TJ Watt's prime. And that is a scary, scary team. So for Pittsburgh, it's a battle. You want to develop Kenny Pickett. You want him to be your franchise quarterback so you don't have to use a first-round asset on a quarterback. But you also really don't want to win games because you would love to get a top 2 or 3 pick. You can take a look at the Steelers' current picks. They've got their first rounder, their second rounder, their third rounder, their fourth rounder, no other picks, so pretty standard. They haven't traded any top picks or anything like that. Picking at number 2 would be best case scenario in my opinion for Pittsburgh. Of course, it does raise the question, if Pittsburgh keeps losing and Kenny Pickett is playing bad, do you think about drafting a Bryce Young at 2nd overall? Do you think about drafting a CJ Stroud? So it's kind of a, it's a plus and a minus losing games because you want Kenny Pickett to develop, but you also want to be able to get that number 2 or number 3 overall pick, and you would need to lose a lot of games for that to happen. So Pittsburgh, best case scenario is Kenny Pickett shows promise, but you keep losing, and you can possibly pair Will Anderson with a potential, TJ Watt or trade down and get a bunch of picks. The next team that I think should lose out, it's going to be the Houston Texans. Now, guys, I've said for the longest time, Davis Mills is not a franchise quarterback. In my opinion, this is Davis Mills last year starting with the Texans. You take a look at the Texans' overall schedule. They just got their first win on the road in Jacksonville, 13-6. Looks like they have a great young running back in Dameon Pierce. They got phenomenal value for him in the 4th round. At Vegas, to me, that's a loss. Versus Tennessee, they might have a chance to beat Tennessee. Versus Philadelphia, that's tough. At the Giants, that's tough. Versus the Commanders is winnable. At Miami's a loss. Versus Cleveland's probably a loss. At Dallas is a loss. Versus Kansas City is a loss. And then 3 winnable division games there at the end. But if I was Houston, I would make sure minimum I want a top 5 pick. You take a look at the war chest they have of draft picks. They also have the Browns pick. Now, the expectation with that Browns first-round pick, it's not going to be top 10. I would think if Houston can get their own pick at top 5 and the Browns like somewhere in the middle of the first round, because I think the Browns will probably be around 500 with Jacoby Brissett throughout much of this year. You're looking at a situation to where you can trade up. If you've got the number 5 overall pick and like a mid-first rounder, you possibly can trade up to the number 2 or number 3 spot and draft your franchise quarterback. They also need receivers as well. Personally, I was not a fan of their 2 first-round picks. Drafting a cornerback number 3 overall, that's just not good value in my opinion. But either way, Houston is set up. They're in need of a franchise quarterback. Davis Mills is not the answer. There's no sense in winning this year. They did just get their first win. We respect that. But they need to tank, and they need to get a minimum of a top 5 pick. The next team, the Carolina Panthers, who just fired their head coach. Baker Mayfield injured, benched, whatever. He's a total disaster. And guys, this is a team, Carolina, it is completely salvageable, but they need to go on an epic tanking spree. There are people and there are whispers out there that maybe Carolina trades Christian McCaffrey before the deadline or DJ Moore. Both of those guys have big contracts. They would both be hard to move. If I'm the Carolina Panthers, I'm sitting back. I'm playing, PJ Walker and things like that. And I'm saying, listen, we're not going to trade anyone. We're going to try and lose as many games as possible. And we're going to have Christian McCaffrey. We're going to have DJ Moore. I don't know what Robbie Anderson's contract looks like, but maybe him as well. Also, Akeem Ekwonu, a young left tackle that you just drafted inside the top 10. And we've got our infrastructure. Let's go get the number 1 overall pick. Let's go get C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young. And now we're bringing our franchise quarterback into a favorable situation already with DJ Moore, already with Christian McCaffrey. Maybe you sign a good, solid tight end in the offseason. You've got weapons for your potential franchise quarterback, and this is a very delicate situation. If I was Carolina and I was their front office, I would be like, listen, it's tough, but we have to lose games. I mean, that's just the bottom. We have to lose games. We've got guys tied to massive contracts. You take a look, they've got their first rounder, their second rounder. They don't have their third rounder. They don't have anyone else's picks. Not a lot of draft capital. There's a little window. If you can lose as many games as possible and set yourself up to get one of those 2 big-name quarterbacks, maybe another quarterback emerges. Right now, a lot of the guys that were thought of to be like a first-round QB, they've kind of fallen off the table a little bit. I'm sure there'll be other guys, but it's pretty clear C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young are far and ahead, the QB1 and QB2 in whatever order you want of this draft class. So you look at their draft situation, it's very delicate. They need to lose. They need to lose a lot. And honestly, I would keep DJ Moore. I would keep McCaffrey. But make sure you keep losing games. That's what I would do if I was them. Their overall schedule at the Rams is a loss. Versus Tampa Bay, probably a loss. At Atlanta. Atlanta's played well recently. At Cincinnati's a loss. They'll probably beat Atlanta in one of those 2 games, or maybe they will. I don't know. At Baltimore's a loss. Versus Denver's probably a loss. At Seattle. Versus Pittsburgh. That'll be a good one. So they kind of actually have an easier schedule, which if I was a Carolina Panthers fan, I would honestly be rooting against my team because it's such a delicate situation. You need that first round pick so bad, or that number 1 overall pick so bad. And then the 4th and final team I think should tank and try and get as high as a draft pick as possible is the Detroit Lions. Now the Detroit Lions have built a very nice young nucleus. You take a look at the schedule. At Dallas, that's going to be tough. Versus Miami's going to be tough. Versus Green Bay's tough. At Chicago, that's winnable. At the Giants, is probably tough. Versus Buffalo is a loss. Versus Jacksonville is winnable. Versus Minnesota is probably a loss. At the Jets, At Carolina. Some of those games are winnable for Detroit. Detroit, of course, had that great offense, and then they got shut down completely by Bill Belichick and New England. And guys, it's just a simple situation with Detroit. You still don't have your franchise quarterback. So it's like you can try and go a number of ways in acquiring the franchise quarterback. Maybe Lamar Jackson becomes available. Maybe another quarterback, kind of like a Russell Wilson situation happens. But generally, you want to try and get, as high as a pick as possible while still developing. I mean, on the defensive side of the ball, they've got good young players. Jeff Okudah, Aiden Hutchinson. On the offensive, DeAndre Swift's been injured. It's been sad. Jameson Williams, a guy they invested a high first-round pick in. He's rehabbing right now. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown. So they have weapons on this team, but it is a situation where you still do need that franchise quarterback. And playing in a dome, I think both Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud, pocket passer guys, it would really suit both of them. They currently have, their own first-round pick, possible top 5. The Rams' first-round pick, which I think will end up being like 20th or something. I think the Rams will be better. They're certainly not going to win the Super Bowl. And then they've got their own second, their own third pick as well. So they do have additional draft capital to use here. They've got 2 first-round picks, so maybe if they, end up with the 7th overall pick and the 20th, they can trade up to get their franchise quarterback or something like that. But I do think at this point, Detroit winning games, it's just there's very little to gain from it other than it negatively affecting your future because you will be getting a worse draft position if you keep winning games, and it's not like you're developing a young quarterback. See, at least with Pittsburgh, if they do win games, you can say, well, at least we know Kenny Pickett is our guy. He's the future. If Jared Goff goes out and wins 7 or 8 games, I mean, it's just, you can't win it. It seems like when you don't have a franchise quarterback, like a situation like Carolina, Houston, Detroit, it best suits you to try and get the best chances at acquiring a franchise quarterback, which is the 1st or 2nd overall pick. And even if you, God forbid, you don't like the quarterbacks, you can always draft Will Anderson. You can always trade down and get so many more picks. So it's just like, it's the idea. Detroit is probably going to win 7 games this year. Is that really worth it to fall down in the draft from picking 3rd overall to 10th overall? Is that, like, who are you developing there? I understand Aiden Hutchinson, Jeff Okudah, you've got good defenders, but it's like, Jared Goff throwing for 330 yards means nothing. He is not your franchise quarterback. So it's a situation where if I was a Detroit Lions fan, we're excited about the future there, but we have to understand we don't have our franchise quarterback. And, item number 1, you do have the receivers. You've got Amon-Ra. You've got Jameson Williams, who should be a beast in the NFL. You've got a potential very good young running back. So you've got the structure there. You've got a good offensive line. You invested a top 10 pick into an offensive tackle last year. Everything around it is good, but you need to hit on the franchise quarterback. And the other thing you can't do is you can't do this half-ass thing like Minnesota did signing Kirk Cousins and stuff. To me, that is just such a lame move. Unless you have a Rams level loaded roster where all you need is a game manager. The idea of signing someone like Kirk Cousins to a 3-year deal or, Derek Carr, quarterbacks of that caliber where they're on the borderline, but they're not franchise quarterbacks. I just don't see a point in that. I would much rather roll the dice and draft a young quarterback and try and develop that way. Unless, of course, your roster is just so loaded. Like, you take a look at the 49ers. They have such a loaded roster. Jimmy G can go to the Super Bowl because of how talented the roster is and how great that defense is. So it really is, these are just 4 teams that I understand it really does affect the culture, and it is kind of a pride thing. You don't want to tank. You don't want to do it. It's kind of just like, you're a poverty franchise losing games on purpose and stuff like that. But it is a situation where if you keep doing this thing where you win 7 games and you never get the quarterback, you're kind of in a Bermuda Triangle. And that is not the situation you want to be in. So these teams, we will see what happens. We will see, it'll be interesting to see what the Steelers do with TJ Watt. It's very clear the Steelers are not making the playoffs this year, or it would certainly be shocking. They're already 1-4. They just lost by 35. Will they shut TJ Watt down? With the idea of tanking, will they bring him back, try and make a run at it? it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.